Hello guys, this is Brian Mounts. We're on turfmechanic.com. I keep a nice yard full of perennial rye and Kentucky bluegrass. I manage this channel and I grow grass in pots. Look at this. This right here is perennial rye. This has been growing since early January. I started it in my garage. This right here is Kentucky bluegrass. It's a blend of 3 different varieties. Also been growing this in pots since January. I want to talk to you about the difference between these two things. Also, I want to kind of relate it to actual lawns. We don't all just grow grass in pots, obviously. We grow them in our lawns. So let's talk about how they differ, why you would put one over the other, why they are blended together so often, and how you can identify the two when they're side by side. All right, I'm going to be completely honest with you here. This is the second time that I've attempted to film this video. The first time I was just too long-winded. I am always long-winded, but last time I was too long-winded. So let's try to keep it brief. These two grass types are very similar. They look similar, they feel similar, their climate that they grow in is similar. They're both cold season grasses. They both struggle a little bit in hot, dry weather. Perennial rye is going to struggle even more in drought, but it doesn't require as much water as Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass, generally, when you have it in a lawn, it's going to struggle more in the heat and the drought of summer. You're going to have to give probably 50 to 70% more water to this grass type, the Kentucky bluegrass, than you are to the perennial rye. Perennial rye is less maintenance. However, it does like having water. So this grass type is really perfect for the Pacific Northwest. It's a cold area that doesn't get particularly hot, nor does it ever get particularly cold. And we get lots of rain up here in Pacific Northwest. Now, I live in Oregon, but I do live kind of in like desert eastern Oregon, southeastern Oregon. So this isn't the perfect climate for this, but generally Pacific Northwest is amazing for perennial rye. This particular variety was grown here in the state of Oregon, the seed that I sourced for this pot itself. What you're going to find is both of these grass types are going to do well in the moderate cold temperatures. But as we move further north into, let's call it polar vortex territory, Kentucky bluegrass really starts to shine because it is more cold tolerant than perennial rye. Now, this isn't really going to factor into many people's decisions unless you live, let's call it in, I don't know, like the middle of the, let's say like North Dakota or northern Minnesota or some of the coldest areas of Canada, maybe like, I don't know, Scandinavia. I don't know exactly who you are or where you're watching from, but truly the coldest areas of the world are going to do better with the Kentucky bluegrass than they are with a perennial rye. Most people, however, growing lawns live in more temperate zones. So a perennial rye is going to be a great option. Both of these are going to have their own struggles with disease. Both grass types are going to deal with the disease and fungal threats better if you have a substantial root system and if you're watering the grass not very often. So if you water the grass maybe once or twice a week, let's call it on average every 5 to 6 days, and you're watering it very, very deeply on those days, you're not going to have too much of disease pressure on either of these grass types. Likewise, if you're adequately fertilizing your lawns, in addition to watering infrequently and deeply, you're also not going to have very much pressure. Both of these are similar. Kentucky bluegrass is going to have slightly better resistance to disease and fungal threats than perennial rye is, but perennial rye is so easy to just reseed spots that die that it's not really that big of an issue. Even if you're putting down weed preventers or weed killers, perennial rye is really robust in resisting those kinds of things. So reseeding patches that die off for whatever reason, whether it be your dog peeing on the lawn, your dog digging it up, maybe you mulched it down on accident by just leaving like a cinder block on the lawn for a couple weeks, whatever the problem is, perennial rye can be fixed really quickly. But you have to seed it. It won't repair itself. Kentucky bluegrass will repair itself because it has underground rhizomes. Rhizomes are little underground little root systems or stems that go horizontally, and then they angle up, and then they start making what appears to be a new plant. But it's all the same plant system. Now, I want to demonstrate to you what that looks like over here, because like I said, in my lawn, I have a mixture of Kentucky bluegrass and perennial rye. Now, I pulled up a paver stone here because I need to drop it down lower. But this is a perfect example. As I pull up the paver stone, you can see all of these root systems here right along the edge where the paver stone was. But as we move up here, we can see where the root systems kind of turn into the crowns of the grass. Now, in this area, you see a lot of just basic roots, but as we move over here, we see things like this. You see this? That is going horizontally, and then it starts angling up, and somewhere goes up in here. Now, we've got lots of these things, but as I move around, you'll see a whole bunch. There's probably a mother plant of some kind over here, bluegrass plant, that is sending rhizomes this way, and then they angle up, and then they come up above the ground. You can see it all around. Now, you'll also notice, I'll single out this one because it's so obvious. This plant right here, you've got green leaves up on top, and then it goes down into the kind of the crown stem area, and it just goes down. You've got green going into pale green, going into white, going into the ground. Now, this is what Kentucky bluegrass looks like. Perennial rye, however, at the very base of the plant is a magenta color. Almost every single perennial rye is going to have it. Now, here's an example. I've already pulled this out so that I could show you here on camera. So right here, let me put it in the camera zone here. See that magenta color in there? The one on the bottom doesn't have it. That's Kentucky bluegrass. The one on the top, or kind of in the middle, does. That's a perennial rye. Perennial ryes have that magenta color. Now here, where the stem kind of leaves off, it starts looking similar, but there are some differences here which I want to talk about briefly. For the most part, the base of those plants look pretty similar, but let's call it there's a shoot sticking up out of the ground for both perennial rye and Kentucky bluegrass. Now, off of that shoot, a new leaf kind of comes out of it. I don't know if this isn't helping at all. A new leaf comes out of it. The leaf is wrapped around the inner shoot. Now, with Kentucky bluegrass, the leaf is wrapped around kind of like this. It doesn't wrap all the way around. This is called the auricle. With perennial rye, it wraps all the way around like a claw. It's a big difference, and it's going to be noticeable on just about every perennial rye versus Kentucky bluegrass, but you have to look very, very close to see it. Now, the shoot that comes out of the auricle is folded on both of them. So both Kentucky bluegrass and perennial rye have a folded vernacular. So that leaf coming out of the auricle is folded at the base, and then it kind of opens up into this kind of like boat shape. Let me show you. All right, let's go back to my pots. So again, here is Kentucky bluegrass. Let me fold these things over a little bit. So there's, focus on one. That one right there You see how it kind of looks ever so slightly cupped at the end. Ever so slightly cupped at the end. And you see that line going down the middle? That is a telltale sign of Kentucky Bluegrass. You also notice on both sides of the blade, nothing really looks particularly shiny. It's kind of more matte. They're smooth to the touch and very, very soft, but there's nothing shiny about them. Now, over here, as we come back over here to the Perennial Rye, you're going to find, let me get the sun on here, you're going to find lots of like reflective shininess. Like, look at that right there. It almost looks moist or like mirrored, reflectioned. So what's going on here, if I pull one of these out, this one looks like a stressed blade, but it's okay. So you see how that looks matte on that side? If we flip it over, it becomes much more shiny. It becomes much more shiny. One side is more shiny than the other. It's really clear to the naked eye. And I apologize, but it is particularly hard, maybe if I had professional grade camera equipment, but it's hard to get the shine on camera. But I mean, right there, look at that. That thing is shiny right there. Over here, you're not really seeing shine at all. Maybe a touch of it right in there, but it's just different. You're also going to find, like if I look at this blade again, that line going down the middle, compared to, say for instance, the line right there, the line on the Kentucky Bluegrass is much more pronounced. You're going to notice the line a lot less. That's called a vein. It's a central vein.
Which one is shiny?
This one's shiny right here, buddy.
Oh.
Can you tell that it's shiny?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, it's very tall.
It is very tall. My son brings up a good point. Perennial Rye is not normally this tall. I have been keeping this tall, like enormously tall, because I wanted to get some uncut tips to show you. The uncut tips kind of come into this boat shape. When you cut it with a lawnmower or scissors, you don't really see the true natural tip that is supposed to grow. Look at that right there. It's a boat shape with a little like point. Over here, if I can get here on the Perennial Rye, you get a little bit of a point also. Harder to you get this little point tip with a little bit of a boat shape to it. Anyway, what you're going to find is these things are very, very soft. They're very pleasant. In the heat of summer, you're going to do better with Kentucky Bluegrass so long as you can keep water on it. It won't die in the heat. It will just go dormant. If you don't keep enough like water on it, it will just go dormant through the summer. Perennial Rye, if it gets too hot, will just simply die. And that's why this is used a lot in southern lawns as a cover crop during the winter. People will put this over like their warm season grasses. Bermuda is a pretty common one. They'll put it over and they'll grow it up so it ends up being green through the winter. And then as spring takes hold, 90s and 100-degree temperatures come out, the Perennial Rye dies off, and then warm season grass turf owners are left with just straight warm season grass like Bermuda lawn. This is really the only grass type that's used like that commonly. Because Kentucky Bluegrass has rhizomes, you're going to end up finding down at the base, you're going to have more thatch problems with Kentucky Bluegrass than with Perennial Rye. In fact, of all the cold season grasses, Kentucky Bluegrass is going to have the most thatch problems of them all. So you're going to have to regularly think about putting liquid dethatching products on this or running mechanical dethatchers over it. With Perennial Rye, you're not really going to have to do it. Now, if you mix them together, you're frequently going to find mixes to have more Kentucky Bluegrass than Perennial Rye. So you're still going to end up having to dethatch a little bit. So here on my lawn, this years ago was a sod installation. So right now we're actually looking at more Kentucky Bluegrass than Perennial Rye, and I also have a thatch problem, so I have to deal with that regularly. So you will too if you put this in. It's going to grow slower, it's going to germinate slower, it's going to grow slower, but it will repair itself. This grass seed will germinate slightly colder temperatures than Perennial Rye, but even though it grows in slightly colder temperatures, you're not really going to effectively notice a difference. If you were to plant this in the spring, you would have an enormously hard time getting it to establish by the summer, whereas Perennial Rye, because it grows so fast, can establish by the summer. Now, for one last parting thought, we'll talk about seed heads. Now over here, I got two little spots in my lawn that I want to show you. Kentucky Bluegrass gets its name because it's got this little blue hue to its seed heads. So that right there is a Kentucky Bluegrass seed head. If you look at it up close, it looks a little bit like a pine tree sitting on top of a long grass blade. And it looks slightly bluish purple. Now, contrast that to a seed head of Perennial Rye. Look at the difference. Perennial Rye, this looks like the top of a stalk of wheat. Now, coloring, I don't know, maybe it's got a touch of that like purplish hue to it, but the point is it's not as pronounced, and it's like a spike. This is what they call it in the biology world. It's a spike seed head. So if you let your lawn go to seed, and it doesn't take much, like, I mean, short lawns can still go to seed, and I can prove it because my lawn is very short. But if you get in really close, you can see, like right there, there's some seeds popping up right there. So no matter how long your lawn is, it can still go to seed. If you look at the seed head, you can actually identify the shape of it. So if you think you've got a bluegrass lawn or a perennial rye lawn, and you're only seeing one seed head but not the other one, you might have either mostly one or the other. That spike seed head is going to be a telltale sign of perennial rye. That little pine tree shape is going to be a telltale sign of Kentucky Bluegrass. Both of these grass types are great. They're both going to look really good in a lawn. So here I'm in a shady spot on my lawn. You're going to find that perennial rye is going to do slightly better in a high shade environment. In a full sun environment, your Kentucky Bluegrass is going to do slightly better. Kentucky Bluegrass is not going to excel very much in full shade. It really needs full sun. If you've got a heavy shaded area like this, or over where my sun is over there, although it's in the sun right now, that spot is usually shaded. That's a prime spot in a cold season lawn for a fine fescue. Fine fescues are the shade tolerant grasses, and that's what goes into shade mixes that you're going to see on the store shelves for cold season lawns. Fine fescues get mixed in because they do well in shade. Parting thoughts here is both perennial rye, both Kentucky Bluegrass are going to look and feel fantastic in cold season lawns. As you move closer to that transition zone, or if you get into drier climates or places where you're not able to irrigate as well, you're going to want to start looking into tall fescues. Tall fescues have better heat tolerance and drought tolerance than both perennial rye or Kentucky Bluegrass. But as you move north and you get into particularly cold areas, Kentucky Bluegrass is definitely the way to go. So I've got a completely written version of this down on the website, linked below in the description. Make sure to take a look at it, because man, it's hard to rattle off all of this information off the top of your head. I have it written down. Take a look, and I hope to see you in another video down the road, maybe this one right up here, where we talk more about grass and taking care of our lawns. Thanks.